We will commence the meeting of April 20th of Quesnel City Council, recognizing that City of Quesnel is on the traditional territory of the LHTAKO DENE Nation. With respect to tonight's proceedings again, just because we have another gaggle of individuals joining us, while my internet has been quite stable, I've been on meetings all day today. Should my internet as the chair should it get unstable or drop off, the acting chair, Councillor Vic, will step into the chair's position, and then I will dial back into the meeting as quickly as possible. So hopefully that's not the case, and it hasn't proved to be the last few meetings. With respect to the agenda, there are just some late items, which are the documentation for the actual items. So I1, the community reports, recommendation to approve the 2020 financial statements, K5, the staff report from Baker Creek Enhancement Society, and K7, the staff report on the outdoor cafe business request. So with that in mind, can I have a motion to approve the agenda? Councillor Elliott, so moved. Councillor Runge, second. Anyone opposed? That motion has carried unanimously. And then adoption of the regular minutes, the electronic council meeting minutes of April 6th. Can I have a motion to adopt? Councillor Goulet, Councillor Rudenberg. Anyone opposed? Errors or omissions? Councillor Paul.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a question, and it's a procedural question. And I note that in the procedure bylaw that if a person is opposed to a particular resolution, they do have an opportunity to express a reason as to why they are opposed. Can that reason extend into the written minutes?
No.
Okay.
No, the vote is recorded as a vote. So, and those kinds of procedural questions should not be dealt with during the adoption of minutes. You can phone the corporate secretary or the city manager at any time to get that clarified. Okay. So that from a procedural perspective, we're just adopting the minutes. We're not dealing with procedure. So just feel free to phone right away and just get that clarified from folks.
I have my answer. Thank you.
Okay. So again, on the motion to adopt the minutes of April 6th, anyone opposed? Seeing none, that motion has carried unanimously. And the special open meeting minutes of April 14th, motion to adopt. Councillor Runge, Councillor Vic, anything on that one? Anyone opposed? That motion has carried. We have two delegations tonight. And I know for a fact that Corey will take over the presentation. Just a reminder, the way that the screens work, I will not be able to see council members. You can use the hands up function if you wish to, but the best thing to do is for when Corey's got a particular spot in his presentation, and same with Melanie later on, where they want to ask questions, they'll have to give me this, ask for questions. They'll have to give me the screen back so that I can see all of our councillors. So please do hold your questions, or as I say, put your hand up if you want to interject during the presentation. So Corey, the floor is yours.
Great. Before I start the presentation, can I get a quick sound check?
Good.
Good. Okay, great. So I will share my screen. Okay, still good. So great. Thank you very much for having me here tonight. As I always like to say, kind of at this time of the year, just like to thank Carrie and the finance staff for their help in performing the audit this year, and also just wanted to kind of summarize some of the procedure that we've gone through. So earlier this morning, we would have done a detailed presentation to the Finance, Sustainability and Audit Committee with respect to the results of our audit, and then done a more thorough walkthrough of the financial statements with that committee. And at this point, really what we've provided is a presentation, just a summary of the financial statements, which is intended to kind of get it into a quick digestible format, and just to give the full council an opportunity to ask questions of myself or of city staff. So I'll take us through. So really the agenda of this presentation, we'll talk a little bit about the auditor's report. As I said, we'll review the financial statements for the year and then show kind of what's in the surplus and reserves, and then I can take any questions at the end. This is pretty quick, so we'll just keep questions for the end of the presentation. So on an annual basis, the city is required to have an independent audit of their financial statements. And there are a couple key words there. The first being that we are independent of the city, and really our function is to provide an opinion that the financial statements are a fair representation of the activities and financial position of the city. We call it a clean audit report here. And for those with oversight, this is what you want to hear from your auditor. A clean audit report means that we were able to perform our audit. We were able to see all the documents that we requested, and we do believe, in our opinion, that that the financial statements are in accordance with Canadian public sector accounting standards and are a fair representation of the operations. So that's the audit report that we intend to issue, and we do that after the financial statements are approved, because obviously you need to be comfortable with your financial statements before we issue our opinion. So getting into the numbers, as is always the case, the city has a financial year end of December 31st. So as of December 31st, 2020, a line is drawn in the sand and we say, okay, what are the assets? What are the liabilities? And then what were the operations for the past year? So the first slide I've got here just shows the financial assets. So those are the assets that are either held in cash or will ultimately be settled by way of cash. So we can see the first item there is the cash position. So that's $14.5 million at the end of the year. So an increase from last year's balance of just under $11 million. The portfolio investments were $15.5 million, an increase from the previous year's balance of $13.4 million. Taxes and accounts receivable were $3.5 million, an increase from last year's balance of $2.9 million. And it's interesting that the actual tax accounts within that balance have not changed largely. It's really due to some accounts receivables from other parties, such as the province and regional district. Property acquired for taxes, $58,000. And then the MFA holds a debt reserve, which is essentially some funds that the MFA is holding on each debt issuance, and those will be returned once the debt is settled. So as total, there's $33.8 million of financial assets as of December 31st, which is an increase from the previous year, which showed financial assets of $27.4 million. So a couple things leading to the increase in financial assets, both the COVID Safe Restart grant that came in near the end of the year, and also there was a surplus position for the year ended 2020. So moving down to the financial liabilities. So these are the liabilities of the city that will be discharged in cash. So accounts payable and accrued liabilities, these would be the regular trade payables and some payroll liabilities. Those were $6.9 million at the end of 2020 compared to $3.5 million. Largely the increase is reflected due to the construction activity on the public works yard as at the end of the year. So there would be some invoices outstanding from the city at that point. Another significant liability of the landfill closure and post-closure costs that are accrued within the financial statements. They're $4.3 million, an increase from the previous year of $4.2 million. And this reflects additional usage of the capacity during the year. There's deferred revenue. So this would be funding that's received, either deferred development costs or some grants that were received with stipulations, and those stipulations haven't been met, so the revenue hasn't been recognized. So that deferred revenue was $2.4 million at the end of the year compared to $2.1 million in the previous year. And then the last financial liability there is the municipal debt. So that's increased from $5.2 million to $12.2 million, largely relating to some new debt issuances related to the public works facility that was under construction. So the total financial liabilities were $26 million at the end of 2020 compared to $15.3 million at the end of 2019. The financial assets less the financial liabilities give you the net financial assets. And as at the end of December 31st, the net financial assets were $7.8 million compared to $12.1 million. As we carry through, there's also non-financial assets. So these are the assets of the city that will not be settled in cash and are held to provide services. So those would include prepaid expenses, which include services that have been paid for in advance and that will be recognized in 2021. An inventory of supplies that were held by the city that will also be used throughout the next year. And then the most significant item there is the tangible capital assets. So those are the physical assets of the city. And those are up from $98 million to $108 million, largely reflecting the additions for the Public Works facility. So the total non-financial assets for the city at the end of the year were $109 million compared to $99 million at the end of 2019. So a breakdown of the tangible capital assets. So there are various categories for which are held, including land improvements, buildings, roads, machinery and equipment, and water systems. You can see on an annual basis, there's a depreciation charge against each of these assets, and that's largely what's driving some of these reductions through the categories. And carrying on, there's also sewer systems, drainage systems, furniture and equipment and technology, motor vehicles, and then finally that construction in progress. So the construction in progress is not amortized as up or for the year ended December 2020. And that's because it has not been put into use. So it's amortized over its useful life, and the amortization starts once the facility is put in use. So you can see that balance was $13.5 million, again, largely reflecting the amount that's been invested into the Public Works facility. Moving on to the operations. So there's three columns here. So on the left, you've got the budgeted numbers. In the middle, you've got the actual numbers for 2020. And on the right, you've got the comparative figures for 2019. So we can see the budgeted revenue for the city was $30.4 million. The actual revenue was $32.8 million. And last year's revenue was $29.6 billion. So largely the increase in revenue was related to the COVID restart funding, which was not anticipated or budgeted for 2020. When we look at the expenses, so there was a budget of $29.5 million, and there were cost savings throughout most of the categories of expenses, leading to actual expenses for 2020 of $27.4 million compared to $28.4 million in 2019. So this led to a surplus for 2020 of $5.5 million compared to 2019 surplus of $1.2 million. To show this in a few different ways, we've also included these graphs. So this shows the revenues for the last 4 years, broken down by the various categories. So you can see the light blue bar at the bottom, that's the net taxation and grants. The purple bar reflects the sale of services. So there would have been a small decrease in sale of services related to airport revenues in 2020 as the airport was not as active through COVID. The dark blue bar is government grants. So that's where we can see the biggest increase related to government grants that were received during the year. The orange bar would be services provided to other governments. Light blue and green are utility user fees and then other revenue. And those remain fairly consistent year over year. Moving on to expenses. So these are the expenses laid out for the last 4 years, and these are by function. So you can see the purple bar is the highest bar, and that reflects the protective services. The first bar there is light blue and reflects general government services. The dark blue is transportation services. There's so many blues because it's KPMG and all we can use is blue. And then the amortization, which relates to the capital cost, is that last green bar. So those are the depreciation charges against all of the capital assets. And you can see the solid waste and management and recycling was back more to kind of normal levels. There's been an increase in that liability as the costs of the landfill closure and post-closure have kind of increased incrementally in 2018 and 2019, and that's kind of gone back down to normal as there wasn't a big increase in that estimate for 2020. So when we look at expenses by object, so instead of the function, this is looking at what were the types of expenses. You can see that first bar there is the goods and services that were purchased. The purple bar reflects the salary, wages, and benefits. The dark blue is the RCMP contract costs. The teal there is the contractors and subcontractors, and then utilities and other. And then that amortization continues to be in a category of its own, that dark blue, followed by insurance, and then the interest and finance charges being the smallest bar there. So when we look at some of the other statements that are included within the financial statements, so there is a net financial assets, and you would have seen that although there was a surplus for the year, the net financial assets for the city have decreased. So the opening net financial assets were $12.1 million. There was a surplus of $5.5 million experienced in 2020, and I'm going down the middle column here. But there was also a net change in non-financial assets. So the significant investment through the public works yard represented almost a $9.8 million use of financial assets that were invested into those non-financial assets. So in closing, at the end of the year, the net financial assets were $7.8 million, as we would have reflected in previous slides. There is a new statement within the financial statement. So this has been here for a couple of years, and this just really tracks some of the unrealized fair market value measurements within the portfolio investments that are held by the city. At the beginning of the year, there was an unrealized loss of $200,000, and that changed by $91,000 and was reduced to $109,000 at the end of the year. When we look at the accumulated surplus for the city, so that was total was $116 million. However, the large majority of that is invested in the tangible capital assets of the city, $96 million, which is the second line from the bottom. $16.4 million is held in statutory reserves. And then the operating fund holds about $4.5 million at the end of the year. When we look at those reserves that were presented there, so they're broken down, and you can see the change within the capital reinvestment, general capital gas tax, water and sewer reserves here on this slide. And then that's followed by land sales, the land stability reserve, tax stabilization, and then the parks reserve. So this is what represents the $16.3 million in statutory reserves. There are also a whole bunch of notes to the financial statements, the full set, which would have been distributed. So I'm happy to take any questions on any of the notes as you would have read through them. So I'll just move on to the last slide, which is just passing it back to you for any questions. So I'll stop sharing my screen.
Thank you. Questions, comments from council? The Finance Committee, as Corey indicated, spent this morning taking an in-depth look. So questions from anybody else? I'm not seeing any hands up, Corey, so you must have done your job well. Corey, could you just comment on one item, and it's the last page of the financial statements and the new reporting, because we just had a brief discussion about that here, how we have to add to our financial statements a specific report about the COVID grant money we got.
Yep. So Schedule 4 to the financial statements was a requirement under the COVID Safe Restart grant to include within the financial statements a schedule showing any funds that were expended and then any funds that were left as of December 31st, 2020. So that schedule doesn't represent the budget for 2021 or how those funds are planned to be spent, but really what was spent through fiscal 2020. And that's required to be reflected within a schedule as part of the funding requirements. So it will be reviewed, and obviously more details will be included on that schedule in 2021, as the majority of the City of Quesnel's money has been carried forward to future years.
Yeah, and so council, that's page 61 of 142. The discussion we had is that could be confusing to the public because you actually have to look at our budget going forward for the allocation of the other funds. And so at finance, we do have a tracking sheet of expended, allocated, unallocated that we'll be tracking that as we go forward. So I just wanted to clarify that because when I saw that this morning, I thought that there may be, it still looks like we've got 1.9 or almost 2 million parked, which we don't. We've got it allocated in our go forward budget. Any other comments or questions? Councillor Runge.
Thank you. So just adding on to yours, is there any way that after that total grant remaining, there could be a paragraph that more or less states that on our financials? Is that allowed, or could we be able, could that be put in there so that, I agree with you. If you're the public looking through this, it says, hey, we got almost $2 million. Why aren't you spending it? So just have that right there with a link or someplace to where it would be on our
Corey and Carrie both spoke that this is a requirement in financial statements are financial statements. If anybody does query, as we've got a place to point them to, which is in the budget, but I'd have Corey or Carrie comment on that because that's kind of where I was at, but it got clarified.
Or could it be put in the notes to the financial statements?
Right, Corey or Carrie?
I can speak to this. So the financial statements are supposed to be for anything spent by the end of December 31st, 2020. We're not supposed to give forecasts of what's going forward. Council could change their mind about something we've allocated or something. It's in our budget, but it could still change. So we don't want to put it in our statements and then have a change. The statements are about what has happened, not what is going to happen.
Yeah, really your year-end financial statements are intended to have future-oriented financial information. That would be it's really not the purpose of the financial statements to say what's going to happen, because as Carrie said, largely that could change. So this is what we're seeing across all municipalities too. This is not, we haven't seen anybody try to put together a schedule showing how the funds are intended to be spent.
Yeah, but I do think for a due diligence on our part, and Corey, when you booked off, we took a look at that as a finance committee. And so, Councillor Runge, if we do get a query, so if somebody is animated enough to look at this and say you still have parked 2 million, if we get a query, we've actually got a pretty clean sheet to give them to show them how the funds are being allocated and where we do have some potential unallocated funds at this point. So that information can be provided quite quickly. Okay. Any other questions or comments? Okay, well, Corey, as always, thank you. And this virtual stuff, we'll all get used to it, and we'll get our reductions in costs at a future date, right? Anyway, that's been part of our discussion about whether or not this kind of approach will reduce some of our fees. So thanks, Corey. Appreciate it very much.
Great, thank you.
And council will address the recommendation of FSAC at the appropriate time. So our second delegation can queue up now, and I'm not sure who's taking the lead. Melanie, you're going to kick off and then turn it over.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
You bet.
Great. Yeah, I'll just start with just a brief introduction to our delegation tonight with a very brief background information. So good evening, Mayor, Council, and City staff. I'd just like to thank you for accepting us as a delegation tonight to your meeting. As many of you are aware, I'm Melanie MacDonald, and I'm Executive Director with Quesnel Shelter and Support Society. For 5 years now, we've been in the state of a public health emergency due to a growing number of deaths from drug overdose. We're now 5 years into this dire situation and facing dual public health emergencies with COVID-19. In these 5 years, more than 7,000 British Columbians have died due to drug overdose, and over 20,000 Canadians. The opening of Bridges Supportive Housing in 2020 created housing opportunities for a lot of our community members who had experienced homelessness for many years. Unfortunately, it's also been overshadowed with concerns for our residents' safety amidst the current overdose crisis. On December 21st, we lost one of our new tenants, Sam Shantyman, to an accidental overdose alone in his unit. This was a really tragic loss for our community and for our organization. Sam's father, Sandy Brunton, and another one of our board members, Ron, have been joining us at our tenant meetings at Bridges, looking at ways of improving people's safety. They've been working with Josh and Jenny, who are the other members of our delegation here with us tonight, to investigate options around a personal wristband system, which would have sensors in it to detect people's vitals should they use substances alone in their unit. A device like this could alert our frontline staff or emergency services in the event of an overdose. So hopefully preventing further loss within our facility. It is just one of many tools that we are working with in this situation, and really nothing is foolproof, but we need more in order to prevent further loss. So I just want to, I haven't seen Josh and Jenny on my screen, but I'm ready to just hand it over to them.
Yeah, I just have Josh on mine, Mel.
Okay.
So if Josh can pop on then.
Yeah. Thank you.
There we go. They're together.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thanks so much, Mel. So yeah, we wanted to, my name is Joshua Muir, and beside me I have Jenny Lee, and we wanted to talk a bit about our project, which was using pulse oximetry to detect overdose. And I'll just share my screen for that so we can all see the presentation. Here we go. Do that as well. Perfect. All right, so my name is Josh, and I graduated this year at UNBC with a bachelor's in science with a major in computer science. And I have a lot of experience with building computer systems, such as the one we hope to build to help us with this problem.
I'm Jenny. I'm also a recent UNBC graduate. I graduated last December with a Bachelor of Science in Computer Science, and I have some previous work experience in IT. So we were initially approached by Ron Craigmile and Sandy Brunton for this project, and we've been working with them and Mel and Bridges to come up with a solution for this problem.
All right, so a bit about the goal we have for this project. It is to obviously help prevent opioid overdose from occurring within the private residences at Bridges Supportive Housing. And to do this, we were going to use wearable technology, like Mel said, probably something like a wristband. And we want to provide an inexpensive, easy to use and modular solution, which the residents will want to use, because a big part of this is making something that's easy and comfortable for the people to actually use. So they'll want to use it and it won't be too hard for them. And so we wanted to create a system that will preserve the privacy of the residents when they're not in danger, but also be able to alert the bridges staff if there is a overdose occurring. So just a bit about how this would work is during an opioid overdose, the part of the brain which regulates breathing is affected. So this results in the user not having enough oxygen, and without oxygen for long enough, the user can die. So a pulse oximeter is a device which provides real-time blood oxygen monitoring. So it can tell at any time what the what someone's blood oxygen level is, and tell how their breathing is with this. So the blood oxygen level decreases when someone is overdosing and can indicate early signs of a drug overdose. And so for our plan, the plan is to use an existing pulse oximeter wearable device and wrist or finger oximeter options. And we're leaning certainly towards wrist because that would be most comfortable for the users, absolutely. And the way it'll work was the oximeter will communicate via Bluetooth with a microcomputer located in the room. So basically what that means is there will be a small device in the room that is like hidden in the room, not really in the way, that this wrist oximeter will be able to communicate with to get data, send data.
So if the wearable device detects dangerously low levels of blood oxygen, aka low respiration rate, the front desk staff will be alerted and they'll be given time to intervene if needed. The data collected by the wearable device will be sent to a central computer located at the front desk for the staff to monitor the users, and it'll all be sent over the local network. And our plan for, we have just a couple of potential examples of the wearable devices that we were thinking of using. So something sort of like a smartwatch or a smart ring will be probably the most user-friendly option. And our plan for implementing this project is to break it up into phases, with the first phase consisting of creating a prototype consisting of one wearable device, which is connected to one microcomputer fitted to one room. Once the prototype is complete and successfully tested, then we will look at expanding the system to cover the whole housing unit. So the deliverables for this first phase of the project include one single unit prototype of an overdose detection system, consisting of one wearable pulse oximeter, one programmed microcomputer, which will connect to the oximeter, and program code to connect all of these devices. So our estimated budget is $25,000, broken up into $24,000 for development labor and $1,000 for all of the required technology and software licensing. And for our timeline, we've estimated this first prototype phase to take 3 months. So that's the end of our presentation. Thank you all so much for listening, and we'll be able to take any questions now.
And Joshua, just give us our screen back. Perfect.
Yep.
Thank you. You must be a kind of a computer guy or something. That happens so fast. So just for context, this would come under our vulnerable population COVID grant money. There was a dialogue about how we may deploy that money. Melanie was working on this initiative because of this situation at Bridges there and that tragic, overdose that occurred there. So Melanie sent an email out asking if there were any partners out there that could help to kick this off. We asked Tanya to get in touch with Melanie to get more details, and then felt that this should come in front of council as a potential opportunity to use our vulnerable population targeted money that we've got from the COVID grant. So that's the context for why council is seeing this. And of course, we don't make decisions just for the presenters during delegation time. It's for information only, and then it will go to either one of our committees or come back to council for a decision. So Questions or comments? Councillor Elliott, followed by Councillor Paul.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you so much for the presentation. This seems like an unbelievable kind of initiative. I've never heard anything like this before. So yeah, I'd be interested in hearing more of how it's going to work, to be able to cover the whole housing unit and maybe even expand that further in the future with anyone that's in a difficult situation. Thanks for the hard work on this, and I look forward to seeing where we can go.
Thank you.
I have Councillor Paul and then Councillor Vic.
Yeah, thank you very much for the presentation. Indeed, interesting. I got a couple of questions. Is wearing the device, is that by choice?
Yes, so the users would they would have to consent to the system because it's collecting data on their blood oxygen. Then they would probably have to agree to use the system. But there's also already been a lot of interest from the tenants at Bridges.
Yeah, this plan was done in consultation with the tenants at Bridges. We looked at a number of different options and ideas, and this was the one that they leaned strongly towards.
Okay, and obviously this is fairly new technology, and I'm just wondering sort of how it's panning out in other areas.
So Councillor Paul, this would be an experiment. This would be the lead experiment that they're seeking funding for, to see if this technology could be applicable in this circumstance.
Oh, so we're leading edge then.
Correct.
There's technology out there. There's room sensors. There's sensors for bathrooms if somebody falls down to detect overdoses. There's other supportive housing initiatives that have like buttons on the wall that somebody presses if they're about to use substances, and then if they don't respond within a certain amount of time, staff are alerted. So there's other technology out there, however, not a wearable device.
Okay, and my final question would be that is there, I guess, a concern about a possible false sense of security/safety if a person knows that they're using this device? Could that lead them to going beyond where they would normally go?
That's a really good question. I think that we're constantly having those conversations with folks around using small amounts, being careful, using the buddy system. We're always having those safety conversations, and I don't think anyone feels any sense of safety. I think they have a really deep understanding of the toxicity of the drug supply and the risk right now. So I don't think so. But it's a really good question, and a good reminder that we need to keep having those conversations.
Thank you.
Councillor Vic and then Councillor Runge.
Thank you. And thanks for the presentation, guys. I think it's an important project, and I'm interested to see where this goes. I have two questions. The first of which is understanding what led to this project is the tragic issue that happened at Bridges. Is there a possibility that this could be scaled up to other vulnerable individuals who could benefit from this technology that don't live within the Bridges facility?
Absolutely. I think it could be scaled up to other housing facilities everywhere, and potentially it could get bigger. As far as the context, for us, our society, just to kind of give you some of where this emergency feeling is coming from, for us, last year, our staff reversed 113 overdoses from March 2020 to March 2021. The previous year, we'd reversed 25 in that same time period. So the number of overdoses and the drug toxicity levels in COVID have increased significantly. And we know that the majority of overdose deaths across our country are happening behind closed doors when people are alone. And so as we're moving towards providing housing for folks and getting people safely indoors, we know that we're increasing their risk by doing so. So that's kind of the context that we're working from.
Okay, thank you. And my second question, I apologize, it might be a bit technical, but understanding the nature of wearable technology and the charging requirements, have you thought through how to minimize that sort of that aggravation or that limitation in this context?
Yeah, so as far as like for charging, that's a great question. What we would hopefully want to do is provide them with more than one wearable option so that they can always be using one while the other one charges, for example. And yeah.
And as far as the wearable devices that we've looked at so far, there are some designed for people with sleep apnea to monitor their breathing, and those are meant to last overnight. So the battery power is, it's pretty good, and they hopefully wouldn't have to charge it too often. Probably about as often as you would charge your phone if you were using it often.
Okay. Thank you very much, guys. Appreciate the presentation.
Thank you.
Councillor Runge.
Yes, to a lot of the other people, the great presentation. My question goes a little bit towards the technology, because this technology it's great, it's cutting edge, it's there. And there are some things out on the market already, both for your fingertips and for wearable watches and things like that. Is there any way to have something that, that actually, uses an app that goes to a phone that we can actually scale up to other places, as you created that you're, creating something that then is, used in multiple scenarios like this, because it's a great idea. And I think just that safety and keeping the privacy of a person and keeping it in-house is a fabulous idea. I just wonder if there's some technology already out there that we can use that they already have, because a lot of them would have a phone on them and that it might actually be able to do this already.
There have been a couple of research initiatives that we found that do a similar thing. We're just not sure about the status of those projects right now, because we've only seen information about them on a research level. So if we were to implement that into our project, we would have to kind of reframe the scope of the project, since we've kind of tailored it to just bridges. But that would definitely be possible, and it would be doable for sure.
Yeah, and after the first phase, we could certainly look into, if that was wanted, especially by the residents, we could certainly look into having it connect to the mobile phone, because that's certainly a great way so people who are not necessarily at the residence can benefit from it as well. So for sure.
Okay. Councillor Rudenberg. You're on mute, Councillor Rudenberg. Somebody
I did click it. No, I really did. I hate to be that person. No, you're on mute. Anyway, so Joshua and Jenny, like, how amazing that something that seems very basic can turn somebody's life around. Like, this is really this is so, I don't know what the word is. It's very exciting from a perspective of the lives that could possibly be saved for this. And, it's timely knowing that we do have some of this vulnerable population COVID grant money out there. And so, it's very timely, and I'm glad there's been that opportunity to be able to work together here, possibly. My question is around, so it works. You've got it on their wrists. What happens to the ongoing costs? Who's going to cover off? And I know that's not towards Joshua and Jenny. This is more towards Melanie. Who's going to take care of the upkeep of the watches and of the computer program and any of those other ongoing costs that are going to be associated with a program like this?
They would be grant-based, Lorianne. There's just no, as far as our ongoing operational budgets that we receive for housing and shelter and our other ongoing programs, it wouldn't fit within the scope of those operations, unless BC Housing decided to adopt it across the board, right? but it would be grant-based. And right now there's a number of grants out there, given the context of the emergency that we're facing. And so there are grants out there, but it'd be grants that we would be applying for.
So I see this as an opportunity, perhaps in the future, if this is something that does come to fruition as an advocacy piece for local government towards BC housing, et cetera. Because if this is something that works with our housing group, this is going to work across the province. And so I see this, potentially as an advocacy piece for local government.
Yeah.
Thanks, you guys.
So as you can see, there's some excitement and everybody's jumping way ahead of the 3-month project. But I was looking at the provincial government's budget and the amount of money going into mental health and addictions and in the new budget, et cetera. I think if there is a wearable technology solution that meets some of the criteria that council members have expanded it into, as Melanie's indicated, and certainly our statistics in Quesnel are individuals dying alone in their own homes. And so that ability to have some kind of technology that sends out a warning signal or something that can get a rescue to that situation, I think the government would be very interested in providing some resources to that. So I'm not seeing any other questions. So I'm going to thank our delegation for the presentation. I'm going to suggest that we just bring back a staff report. So Director Turner, who's on and was part of this, we can just bring back a staff report at our next council meeting. And then council can make a determination on the on funding a project such as this. So thanks very much for your time. I appreciate it very much, and best of luck in your endeavors.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good evening.
Okay, moving on to our meeting agenda. We now have the reports from Financial Sustainability and Audit Committee. Councillor Elliott.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is from our previous meeting. We met today, but this is from March 30th. So just an update on the FSAC meeting. Some of the topics that we discussed: the surplus. The committee reviewed the final surplus for 2020, and all surplus funds have been allocated by council to various reserves. The finance department update: the virtual audit for 2020 has wrapped up, and the auditors are, well, they obviously just presented. The capital update: the committee reviewed the capital update for December 2020. Gas tax funds will be doubled again. This is great news. We'll be able to backstop the lack of the casino funds if needed. The committee wants to ensure that next year any deferred projects are reviewed as part of the capital plan budget to ensure that everything that is budgeted can be achieved. If those projects cannot be done next year, they will be removed to an out year. The tax rate and 5-year financial plan bylaw timing: it was agreed to add another council meeting May 11th to make the timing work better for okay. Nonprofit funding discussion. The committee discussed the referral from council regarding funding not-for-profits or NFPs organizations. We discussed the importance of following the policies already in place, as previous councils have been in this situation before. The challenge is that many of the needs of the NFPs are ongoing funding issues that have been made worse due to not being able to fundraise during COVID. If the city were to consider funding NFPs, it would need to be a meaningful, equitable, and transparent process for all. We did have good conversations about all the NFPs in the community and, in fact, the whole province. Besides COVID, many of the NFPs have year after year challenges in base funding for operating costs, including staffing, and have a very hard time obtaining or retaining volunteers. Many different programs have been established by the province to help with different areas of need of individuals, communities, etc. But nothing has come forward for the NFPs, and we would like to ask this to be addressed. The city's business support team has already reached out to about 45 of the NFPs, and one possibility discussed was hosting a grant writing workshop with Community Futures. Many NFPs do not have the capacity or knowledge of how to obtain the grant funding. Another idea was a donate local program. If we could highlight the NFPs in the community to bring awareness, this could help. And if community members wanted to donate directly, they could find all of the information they need. So instead of just throwing in, money for Red Cross or something, we could have a listing of all the NFPs in our community. You could get all the information you need and donate directly to them if you wanted. So some of the actions from the discussions, the city's business support team will contact the NFPs again and determine the effects of COVID and the need of support. The city will review the possibility of a donate local program and also consider the possibility of working with Community Foundation on a new grant program for not-for-profits affected by COVID. And we had a referral to the executive consideration of a motion to NCLGA or UBCM regarding funding the NFPs due to COVID, an area that seems to have not been covered in the past. So we did have a resolution come forward today.
Sorry,
Mr. Mayor.
Let's deal with this report because you've kind of jumped.
Yes, sir.
The first one was just the resolution of adopting the financial statements, but let's just deal with this report, put it to bed, then we'll come back to the adopting the financial statements.
Sounds good.
So any questions or comments on the finance report from March 30th? As you know, most of the work has been done or is in progress. I'm not seeing any questions or comments. Okay, that report is there. And now, Councillor Elliott, now the recommendation from today vis-a-vis the financial statements.
That the Financial Sustainability and Audit Committee recommends to Council to approve the City of Quesnel 2020 financial statements for the year ended December 31st, 2020. This was put forward by Councillor Goulet and seconded by the Mayor, and I would like to move that forward.
Yes, if you move that and a seconder for that, please, Councillor Goulet. Any questions or comments? Anyone in opposition? Seeing none, that motion has passed unanimously. Thank you, Councillor Elliott.
Thank you, Mr.
Next,
Mayor.
Councillor Vic on the econ.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This report is to cover our econ meeting that we had at the end of March 31st. I guess the main event was we had a really great discussion with members of the Pride Society. The discussion had preceded a lot of work that had been done by econ in not only prior months with this committee, but in prior council committees. And we're very pleased that we put some work in to try and assist the Pride Society in realizing a dream or an ambition to have a Pride feature in the community. So it got narrowed down to a couple of features. One that was sort of on the table for them was a crosswalk feature. And then another feature that had been discussed and is actually exciting is a mural. Unfortunately, the Pride Society doesn't have the funds to proceed with a mural. That could be a costly venture. But they did have a benefactor who came forward to, who offered to pay for the installation of a crosswalk. And that's got an installation cost of approximately $3,000. So the Royal Bank of Canada has agreed to help with that cost. It is also recommended by executive that future maintenance of this proposed sidewalk be aggregated into an overall line painting, crosswalk painting budget, and that'll follow in my recommendation at the end of the report. Interesting, at the tail end of that conversation, it was discussed that that key intersection in our downtown core is a very prime location for a Pride crosswalk, but it could be an extremely important intersection for other Indigenous partners to have a cultural significant design at other parts of that intersection. So that's a really interesting concept, and executive will continue to explore those opportunities with other partners, and we will report back to council as we make progress on that. We moved on to upcoming community engagement and strategic communications. And Director Bolden updated the committee regarding the anticipated association with Monogram Communications. And Monogram specializes in communication and public relations strategies that are customized for their clients. Director Bolton explained that Monogram feels we have an excellent foundation from which to build on, and getting to sort of that next level of engagement will be the priority. So some identified areas to work on would be improving the city's landing webpage, promoting more effective internal engagement at the city, expanded use of video, and considering new engagement tools such as Bang the Table, which sounds really exciting. And that would promote more informed dialogue in the community. Currently, there's a $50,000 allocation for this project from the COVID Restart Grant. And notwithstanding the important conceptual work, implementation is also what we're looking for some support from Monogram, as we just need some actual boots on the ground to help us get this off the ground. So we're looking forward to that contract beginning, and we'll keep council informed as that progresses. Next, we looked at strategic initiatives. We have the calendar, of course, that keeps us on task and on track. Executive discussed progress with the calendar, and by and large, we are on track or complete with many of our initiatives. One idea which rose to the surface as a result of the discussion was how we might celebrate the significant progress the city has made with many or soon to be made projects such as the Visitor Center, the Museum, Spirit Center, Spirit Square. Understanding that COVID-related restrictions may or may not pose an issue in the fall, how might we engage our citizens to go out and experience these new assets that we've developed? So there are many ideas floating around on that. One such idea was a passport program, like a self-guided tour. If restrictions are relaxed towards the fall, we could look at a large celebratory gathering. Manager Reed will be briefing us with her team, or briefing her team on the question, and she will be following up with executive on how we might move forward with that. We next move on to project inventory for grant submissions. City Manager Johnson presented executive with a comprehensive list of projects. Some are already in the planning phase that largely depend on grant funding from other levels of government to see them through. There are many lenses from which to view these projects. The largest infrastructure projects, such as water treatment, will likely only move forward with the support of from levels of senior government. However, other projects, such as elements of our new waterfront strategy, zero waste initiatives like a compelling composting program that we've talked about, these smaller projects may qualify for NDI grants through the Strategic Initiatives Fund. So executive has asked that the list be compartmentalized and sort of boiled down to those few projects that we believe will be the next ones to go after. So that thereby focusing our efforts on projects that stand the best chances of getting grant funded. So we'll report back as that list gets synthesized more. So moving on to recommendations. Mr. Mayor, did you want to, as Councillor Elliott did, you want to just move the report and then do recommendations, or just shall I keep going?
Already received. So are there any questions on any of the content of the report, and then we'll go to the recommendation? Councillor Elliott.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Vic, as chair of this committee, doing great work. I just wanted to go back to, I mean, I see the recommendation, but I just wanted to slide back to the pride question of the sidewalk, etc. Growing up on the island, I was close to Chemainus and all of the murals, and it's just incredible, and it's such a big draw for everyone. So could you help me out with what the cost of a mural would be? Like you said that it's cost prohibitive, but I have no idea what the cost of a mural on the side of a building would be.
Thank you for the question, Councillor Elliott. I can only speak anecdotally for murals that the Downtown Association has commissioned over the years, and murals that have been sort of refurbished and repaired. And those costs are, I remember one refurbishment cost over $2,000. And then murals from scratch. The latest mural that was put on AC&D's building the cost was so high that they actually compartmentalized it into small colored placards that were added together to make the mural. And that allowed individuals to contribute a $10 donation to buy a piece of the mural. And that overall cost of that mural was, again, at least a few $1,000s. So from what I understand from the Quesnel Pride Society, they just don't have that kind of cash on hand to proceed with the mural. And running concurrently with that, this offer from the Royal Bank was made. So they sort of wanted to head in that direction first, but it was made clear to myself and the committee that the mural idea is not discounted. It's sort of the next project.
Okay, because yeah, that's helpful. Because like I said, I would be very interested in you know, a possible Pride mural, a possible First Nations mural. Some of the ones in Chemainus had some of the chiefs on there from long ago and stuff. Very, very interesting. And the other thing with that is that you know, it's visible 12 months of the year.
Yeah.
Whereas when we've got the sidewalk, it's going to be out of scope. You won't be able to see it 6 months of the year too, right? So I am in favor of support, but I'm glad to hear that, you know, maybe there's something down the road, because I would like to have more draws as well for the community. But thank you for this.
And I think for clarity, it was sort of our initiative to contemplate a mural. And so I think we can come back around to that. And the idea of a mural is to demonstrate not just the Pride inclusion, but also a general inclusion within the city. So, but the RBC funding is specific to a crosswalk, and so that's where the Pride Society is landing. So, okay, other questions or comments on the report? Okay, so Councillor Vic, you can take us to the recommendation.
Okay, so the recommendation from executive is that the executive committee recommends that council approve the installation of a rainbow crosswalk crossing St. Laurent Avenue from Spirit Square to the Royal Bank, subject to the following: that the Royal Bank fully funds the initial installation of the crosswalk, that the city of Quesnel agrees to cover the ongoing repairs and refurbishment of this feature, that design has to be paintable by our commercial line painting crew, and that executive committee directs staff to consider artistic features for Spirit Square to commemorate First Nations inclusiveness, with the report coming back to the executive committee.
Were you making that motion, Councillor Vic?
I am making that motion. I apologize. Yeah.
Councillor Rudenberg, I saw your hand go up for second. Questions or comments on the motion? Councillor Paul.
Thank you. I'd just like a little bit of clarification as to what we mean by commercial line painting crew. Is that our own forces?
No, we've contracted, if you recall, we contracted out line painting.
Mr. Mayor, if I could comment?
Yeah.
So yes, with regards to the commercial, that is a contracted out painting that they come in every year. But what I wanted to bring council's attention to is bullet point number 2, that the city of Quesnel agrees to cover the ongoing repairs and refurbishment of this feature. I think this is a really critical part. And from my perspective of trying to operate the city and trying to maintain it, this feature, we will maintain it to a very high standard because it's the first time it's been there. It's highly visible. So if there is vandalism, the city crews will do our best to go and maintain that. So we'll keep track of what those costs are. We'll keep track of what any incidents would do happen. And hopefully it's not that many. I have no reason to suspect it'll be bad, but we will be maintaining it to a high level, and we'll report back to council that if council approves this, of what that cost is at the end of the year. Thank you.
Thank you, City Manager. And to Councillor Paul, the discussion that we had with our Director of Public Works is that the line painting crew that we use does install these in other communities. And so it's becoming a bit of a standard design. So he would work with them. One of the things that the Pride Society is hoping is that we could move up the line painting in that area, because it is a contract, so that this is completed, I believe, by the end of May because that's when Pride Week is. I think it's the last week of May or something like that.
That's correct.
So the Director of Public Works has indicated that this is achievable technically. Whether the time frame is achievable or not depends on our contract situation and when the line painting crew would be coming into town. Okay, Councillor Runge.
Thank you, and thank you for that point with regards to bullet number 2. I've got a question, and it's not about vandalism, it's just about maintenance. Do we have any maintenance costs from other communities on just the maintenance of one of these sidewalks? You know, because you're dealing with the different colors of paint and all that, do we have any kind of costs from Williams Lake or anyone else? And it's not with regards to vandalism. That's not what I was thinking about, just maintenance.
Yeah, and I think everybody should make a note in their mind when they refer to this, because I used to do it myself. It's a crosswalk. So we don't confuse folks, because everybody keeps using the term sidewalk, and it's an actual crosswalk, okay? And we did have that conversation, City Manager. Do you recall? We had numbers, but we had a hard time parsing out the numbers because there's a crosswalk there anyway, and the crosswalk's maintained anyway. So, parsing out the incremental cost was a bit challenging. City Manager?
Thomas did say is that typically we would be painting this every 2 years. So this would be on a 2-year rotation for repainting it. But it is part of a very large package of other crosswalks that get painted at the same time. So it's as part of the total, it's quite negligible. If you were to send in a crew just to specifically paint this, yeah, it's going to cost some dough. But when that crew's around, going from one to the next, it's actually not that prohibitive from a cost perspective. But that's all he could say. He didn't know what that repaint cost would be. So until we've actually been there and done that, we don't really know that.
Well, and the paint technology's changed too, because initially the paint that was used for this wasn't the no slip paint. It didn't have the durability, etc. So it's a bit of a changing domain. And so, for us, as the city managers indicated, if outside of the contract, this has to be managed and maintained, we can parse those costs out and report back to council. Otherwise, it would be embedded in a very large line painting contract.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? Councillor Rudenberg.
Thank you. So I think you're correct around the timing, because I believe Pride Month is June, and they were talking about, if COVID allows them, something near the end of June. And just in regards to this question around the maintenance, so some of my notes said the refresh standards are approximately every 2 years. And so I think one of the things we have to understand is that, moving forward, we don't want something that's out there that starts to look dull and worn out and whatever. If we're going to do this, we have to do it right. And we have to make sure that it stays right. It's not just like a one-off kind of project and then we just let it disappear because we don't take good care of it. So I think that was a really important piece of the discussion that we had with this group, is that there would be ongoing maintenance of the crosswalk. And as the mayor has said, the paint is now ministry standard. And so it's not that it's that overly expensive specialized paint anymore. It's actually being used more and more. And so it was really good to have the conversation with Public Works and the group, understanding where we're going to move forward with this. So I'm definitely supporting this initiative.
Great. I have no other hands up. So on the recommendation, anyone opposed? The motion has carried unanimously. Thank you, Councillor Vic.
Thank you.
Moving on to Councillor Runge, Policy and Bylaw. And Councillor Runge, if I could, the items in here in your report that are on the agenda, you can just, bypass those because we're going to get into the substantive aspects of it. Don't delve into them and spend your time just on the ones that are not on the agenda but are coming forward as part of your report. Okay.
You're going to make it really tough on me there.
No.
All righty.
Item number 2 in your report is fire services bylaw. There's no point really
Yeah.
discussing it other than saying we've recommended it to come forward because
Yeah,
it's.
so all the recommendations we'll just go over and then I'll come to with the other ones. It was a fairly busy meeting and we covered a lot of stuff. So as you see there, we had some, bylaw committee stuff that we're talking about, fire services that will have a recommendation below. Did you want me to also talk this? So the new council's procedure that also will.
Yeah, so if you could just simply deal with the ones that are only going to be dealt with in your report. So the fire is going to be dealt with as part of tonight's agenda. The
All right.
the garden is going to be
Sorry,
dealt.
sorry. When I was getting ready for it, I didn't quite get ready for it that way. So
Yeah.
my apologies.
Just the ones
right.
only in your report.
Yeah, so we did discuss the fire services bylaw and there were a number of recommendations that are going to follow that we will talk about a little bit below. So we're really the intention of our discussions were to try to align us a little bit more with what's done provincially. Then we also, sorry if I missed one there, a proposed council select committee for tourism advisory committee. And it will be going to, so we talked about it as terms of reference, and we will make an amendment to IWC 17 where we change appointments so that we can put another chair on the select committee. And the proposal, the post terms of the reference will go to another council meeting in the future. So the recommendation for IWC 17 is below. We also discussed some zoning bylaw changes. And I'm not sure if that was below or Director Turner was going to talk about it. Director Turner recommended changes to align our building code with regards to secondary suites and the sizes of them and where they are put in a building, including allowing all side-by-side semi-detached homes, eliminating the restriction of floor space to be 40% of total gross floor area, and eliminating maximum floor area of 90 meters squared. To be adopted as a policy to our Quesnel zoning bylaw, and that will follow with a recommendation also below. Yeah, and then we also talked about, I'm just trying to see if this was below, sorry, Mr. Mayor, the functions of the Board of Variance and the reappointment of members. Director Turner asked the Policy and Bylaw Committee for assistance in searching for a new board of Variance member. And so our action is that the Policy and Bylaw Committee directs staff to begin searching for new Board of Variance member, which would be by appointment of council. And staff will bring a report to council with a recommendation for the council appointment at a future time. Number 6, we talked about a community garden and a composting center. Baker Creek Enhancement Society requested use of lands between the Quesnel River and Johnson Avenue, adjacent to and fronting 601 Johnson Avenue, for a community garden and a composting center. That will be followed by a recommendation also. Our council procedure bylaw amendment, handling of electronic meetings. So with a separate procedure with reference to the procedure within the bylaw, we all included in a recommendation. And number 8 was our council code of conduct, which we are still postponing to a future meeting. It will not be happening this Thursday, as there's some other engagements. We've postponed this meeting on the 22nd. And number 9 was on North Star Church requested a permissive tax exemption for their vacant lot behind the church. And it was a letter, and it stated that the property was being used for outdoor church activities. We do have recommendation also to follow below. And I think we had a closed meeting also, and then we moved to our next meeting to this Thursday, but that was postponed just recently. So I guess that's the report. It was a fairly, we covered a lot of different material, and if there's any kind of questions, this would be a great time to ask. Then I think we can move to the recommendations.
Yep.
So recommendation for the Policy and Bylaw Committee terms of reference amendments, and we see who it's moved by. So that the Policy and Bylaw Committee recommends to Council the following amendment to the terms of reference for the Policy and Bylaw Committee. And we add the Director of Development Services, and we remove the Manager of Legislative Services. And it really is just to cover off what we're doing now at City Hall.
So you want to make that motion then?
Yeah, so I'll make that motion that we make those changes. Hopefully
Yeah.
everybody was able to read it.
Yeah, seconder? Councillor Rudenberg, any questions or comments? It's just an administrative adjustment to it. Seeing none, anyone opposed? Okay, that motion's carried. The fire
Oh.
protection we're dealing with tonight, so we can just move on. It is recommended by the committee.
And then continuing on with the appointments, IWC 17 Council Committee and Appointments Policy. So moved by myself and Councillor Rudenberg that the Policy and Bylaw Committee recommends to Council the amended Council Committee and Appointments IWC 17 policy sections. So select committees. So we add reference to non-council chair by council appointment and select committee chairs reporting requirement.
Yeah, so I think in this one, I want to just check in with Manager Reed. Basically, we've got this in draft form, and it's to accommodate the establishment of a tourism committee in advance of a successful MRDT. So I think we can treat this as information for council at this point. We've got a draft document, and then we can float that out to our hotel operators. And I think that was your preference right after the committee did the work, is to not lock it in at this point, but use it as a draft document to let the hotel operators know that, correct?
That's correct. One of our hotel operators in particular had asked to see what the terms of reference would be for the committee. So we wanted to have it passed by Policy and Bylaw Committee to make sure that committee was okay with what we were proposing to the hotel operators. So having done that, we've now shared it with the hotel operator, and we'll continue from there. Once we've got everybody signed on, then we can go forward.
So rather than locking it in now, if there are some nuance changes or what's not, we'll bring it back, but it's for your edification at this point, okay? So then, thank you, Manager Reed. So if we move on to the zoning bylaw, secondary suites then.
So once again, the Policy and Bylaw Committee recommends to Council that all provisions now permissible in the building code for the development of secondary suites, including allowing in all side-by-side semi-detached homes, eliminating the restriction of the floor space to be 40% of total gross floor area, and eliminating the maximum floor area of 90 meters squared, be adopted as policy amendments to the city's zoning bylaw. And as I said before, that just puts us in line with what the province is doing.
Okay, can I, and you're moving that? Okay, seconder, Councillor Rudenberg. Questions or comments? Seeing none, anyone opposed? That motion then has carried. And again, we can bypass the community garden and composting because it's on the agenda tonight, but the recommendation from PABCOM is to proceed with that. So then the council procedure amendments.
So bylaw number 1898, council procedure amendments, that the Policy and Bylaw Committee recommends to council the approval of council procedures bylaw 1898 with the following amendments.
Yeah, I think we can just say those are administrative amendments.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So I move those amendments, and if hopefully there's someone there to second us or myself.
But if I could point out, Councillor Runge, so where we ended up, because you'll remember we've gone around and around on the electronic meeting procedure. So embedded in the recommendation is, rather than putting electronic meetings procedure in the procedure bylaw, we would just come up with a separate page for that so that we use that. We've had a real struggle getting it embedded. So in the amendment, we're basically saying, do this little bit of a tidy up, and then we'll develop a standalone procedure for electronic meetings. So we've got that. Certainly we've got mover and seconder for that, right? Okay, I see the city manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Based on some discussions we've been having at a staff level on that, I thought we were going to save any substantive changes to the council procedures bylaw, maybe tackle them this fall, along with code of conduct to see if we need a rewrite, and along with our basically our council procedures. What's that other? We have one little other bylaw. Yeah, thank you. The meeting norms, to see those three things, to see if we can change them and do that as part of an initial look at our election package for getting it updated so that when for next year's elections, right? Typically the time we do it. So that will be this fall. We would take that closer look at those things.
Yeah, it makes sense to do all three of those documents together. So, okay, but that's a timing issue. So, so with this, there's just that little bit of tidy up, and then at some point, a separate procedure for electronic meetings would be derived, and if that's this fall. So, with that, anyone opposed? Seeing none, that motion is carried. And then your last one.
You guys are way too kind, but all right. Finally, request for permissive tax exemption on North Star Church, and the reason for our denial on that one, unfortunately, that the Policy and Bylaw Committee recommends to Council that a permissive tax exemption not be provided to the vacant lot owned by North Star Church next to the lot their church is on, due to the clause 3.3 under the public worship section of in the permissive tax property tax exemption policy CCR 12 that states exemptions will not be granted to land held for future development and land greater than normally required for buffer zones, and to be consistent with how other public worship requests have been handled in the past. So really that we're just saying, look, if it's there.
Yeah. So you're moving that?
Yes.
Seconder? Councillor Rudenberg, questions or comments? Seeing none, anyone opposed? That motion is carried unanimously. Thank you, Councillor Runge, for being tonight, because we've still got lots on the agenda here. So
yes, thank you.
Okay, next, moving into staff reports. Then our fire chief is up with the actual changes to the fire protection, prevention, and emergency services bylaw. So now, Chief Riker, Richard, you can put your video on. There we go.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Simpson and our Mayor Simpson and Council. So obviously, we're looking for a approval for proposed changes in our city Quesnel Fire Protection Bylaw 1902. Obviously, the last time this was reviewed was 2011. So it's been a while. So obviously, we've made these changes to help with some enforcement, clarification, and hopefully ensuring better compliance. Most of those changes obviously were in the campfires and the fireworks and the open air burning, because we've had a lot of call volume in those over the years. And we can completely, we actually did a lot of changes within our fireworks section, obviously, just to get better clarification, hopefully better compliance in those areas. So other critical areas obviously were our service level. We talked about boundaries in our fire when we're on a fire scene, so we'll have better compliance as far as people entering our fire scene and crossing our fire boundaries. And then section 9 had to do with private hydrants. We added that in there because we are having we have obviously our city with our city hydrants, but private hydrants have to be maintained by people that own the property. So any questions?
Yeah, so council has the whole document. The edits are bolded, and as we noted, PABCOM did a full review of the document and is recommending it as proposed. Questions or comments on the document you have in front of you? Councillor Paul. You turned your video off, Councillor Paul. Councillor Paul, you turned your video off, didn't unmute. Okay, while we wait for Councillor Paul to come back up, any other questions or comments from others? Seeing none, I'm not quite sure what's happened with Councillor Paul. Yeah, good. Okay.
Oh, there he is.
Sorry, I had a notice about an upcoming meeting blocking my my control panel. My question is, regarding the new $250 charge for high hazard fireworks, which I presume are the big commercial brand of fireworks such as Billy Barker Days.
Yep.
So is that a new fee that Billy Barker Days and other groups such as BB Days will be faced with? And why is it necessary?
Well, with the obviously it's the high hazards. We're just kind of, what we did is we actually reviewed other municipalities our size and basically fireworks shows what they have that are similar to the Billy Barker Days, and that's kind of the cost that they have in their permits.
So we attend at those, correct? When they have
Sorry?
the high hazard? Do we have a crew attending?
Actually, sometimes they do. Actually, it's been a while since obviously we've had Billy Barker Days, but yeah, in previous years we've had it where they have some representatives from the fire department right at the actually site where they're lighting them off.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Other questions or comments, Councillor Vic?
Thanks, Chief. Is there perhaps consideration? I can think of the Downtown Association and others who hold multiple events per year where fireworks could be involved. Is there maybe capping that fee to a yearly fee, regardless of how many events occur?
So
Because
Councillor
Vic, they wouldn't be high hazard.
Oh, okay, I apologize. Thank you.
Yeah, they'd be, so we got two hazards in there, right? So definitely we have the low hazard and we have the high hazard.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions or comments? Councillor Runge.
Thank you. I guess because it was 3.11, the demolition of buildings, that we had some discussions on during the meeting, and I just we were going to get some clarification on that. Now, is that in there now that we've had that clarification?
Is that section? Sorry again.
Section 311, page 92 of 131.
So can you recall what the question for clarification was?
So the question was, we do have this word in there, but our liability, should we in one case demolish the incorrect building?
Okay,
and I think
Director Bolton.
Hopefully we don't demolish the incorrect building.
Yeah.
So yes, I talked to MIABC, and as long as we're following all the proper fire procedures, we have no liability. The original home on fire would be covered by their house insurance. If we had to demo another building because it was close by and danger, whatever, it would be covered under their house insurance. But as long as we're following proper fire procedures, we have no liability.
Okay, Councillor Paul. You're muted again, Councillor Paul.
Sorry, got it. I need to go back to the fireworks again and ask if it's possible to have a reduced fee in the case where the fireworks are being set off by a certified licensed contractor, and therefore without the need for fire department members to have to attend.
So Director Bolton, maybe you could clarify the ability for waiving fees or adjusting fees. This is establishing the fee. Either the city manager or Director Bolton, could you clarify this business of our flexibility regarding fees?
Yeah, so our entire fee bylaw has a clause that the city manager or myself waive up to $1,500 in fees if there's a reason. Otherwise, council can waive fees at any time too. So if there was a valid reason, the person could come forward and we can look at it.
If I may, Mr. Mayor, though, that waiver in our fee bylaw, I like to think of that more as a, if there's kind of one-time events come up, so there may be a reason to waiver. If there's something could be on a regular basis, like a contractor who could do, as Councillor Paul suggested, a professional person who knows how to light these off, that is more of something that if we anticipate that kind of a waiver, then I think we would be better off to build that into the bylaw, because it would potentially be regular as opposed to just a one-time waiver. So
again, we're not going to draft a bylaw tonight. We have a very long meeting that we're just
Yeah.
in the middle of, and we have it going on. If council has the option to just simply stand this down until they get this one remedied, or we know that we have flexibility on the fees, so establish the fee, pass the bylaw, and then test the case. And then if we need to come back and make an adjustment, make an adjustment. But I'm not willing to engage in a conversation where we're actually adopting the bylaw as recommended, right? So, and it's recommended by PABCOM. So, Director Bolton, did you want to jump in? I thought I saw your hand.
Yeah, just one thing I wanted to add is we do relook at the fee bylaw every year. So that's also an opportunity to look at this. And also that clause does state that they must have a valid fireworks supervisor card. So it already is in there that has to be a person that knows what they're doing.
Yeah. Councillor Paul.
Thank you. I just like to see this go back to staff to see if there's a possibility that we could have a two-tiered charge.
So let's stop. Councillor Paul, you've been around long enough. The master fee bylaw is where we can have those conversations. It's reviewed annually, and we can make adjustments annually. This is a comprehensive change to a bylaw that has more than a single fee in it. If we didn't have a way to address the fee, then fair enough. But we do have a way to address the fee. I'd sooner just simply deal with the bylaw and all of the other substantive changes in the bylaw than go around and round in circles as to what the number ought to be for the fee. We can address that in the master fee bylaw. Okay. So on the recommend, Councillor Runge.
Sorry. So that being said, couldn't we just have the bylaws state that? And because that master fee schedule would then be adjusted as needed anyway. Because otherwise, every time we make a change, we're going to have to make a change to two different documents?
No.
No? Okay, thank you.
How the process works, folks. You need to lock these processes in. So we have a substantive number of changes to a major bylaw, one of which is establishing a fee, which we have a master fee bylaw to address on an ongoing basis, and we have latitude. So my suggestion to council is deal with the substantive changes in the bylaw. So on that, we have a motion on the floor, correct?
Correct.
I'm sort of losing track here. This Zoom stuff gets to you after a while. Okay, so we have a motion on the floor. Ms. Hartley, I'm looking to you to make sure I've got a mover and seconder.
I apologize. I don't know.
Okay, so Councillor Runge still moves, seconded Councillor Rudenberg. Any further questions or comments on the bylaw? Okay, noting that we've got a discussion, ongoing discussion on that one point, I would ask if anybody is opposed to the bylaw. Seeing none, that motion's carried unanimously. Thank you, Chief.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, next item, OCP zoning amendment, vacant land. Director Turner. Pop on.
Are we?
Sorry, Board of Variance. I'm
Sorry, yeah, sorry, thanks, Mayor, yeah.
working off three screens here, and the smallest one is my agenda tracking. So the
And
Board
we're
of,
having Mr. Hunter present this.
yeah, go ahead, Lyndon.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Just want to make sure that my mic is working and everything's good on my end.
You're good.
Perfect, thanks. Yeah, so the purpose of this report to council is to review the current status of the Board of Variance, as well as provide information regarding the board's process and procedure. So before I get into the summary and recommendation, I just want to point your attention to the first attachment. So it's just an overview of what the Board of Variance is and just generally what the process is, because I don't think any Board of Variance information has been brought to this council. It's been since 2014 was the last time that a new Board of Variance was appointed by council. So firstly, there are two main methods for varying development related bylaws. First is the development variance permit, which is resolved through council, and then the Board of Variance, which resolves a little less restrictive regulations in bylaws such as the zoning bylaw or the mobile home park bylaw. It's important to note, though, that if applicable for both processes, the applicant has the right to decide on which procedure to see through. What is a Board of Variance? So a Board of Variance is a group of citizens appointed by council to very particular regulations under specific conditions. As per the legislation, a local government that adopts a zoning bylaw must establish a Board of Variance. The size of the board is determined by the population of the community it serves. So for Quesnel's population, the number of board members is 3. So what specifically can a Board of Variance resolve? The Board of Variance is able to resolve particular variances that are considered minor in nature and would cause undue hardship to the property owner if not approved. So there is some guidance on what is considered minor and hardship. Ultimately, though, it is a matter for the Board of Variance to determine. As for what is typically considered undue hardship, that can include items such as siting, size, dimensions of a building. So that's the main type of application that our Board of Variance receives. It's primarily these building siting infractions or dimensions for a building, maybe floor area or heights or something like that. So on the other end, what can a Board of Variance not vary? Specifically, it can't vary floodplain regulations, orders that conflict with a section 219 restrictive covenant, structural alterations or repairs of a non-conforming building or structure which has been damaged to an extent of 75% as determined by the building inspector, or land use and density, and that can't be varied in a development variance permit either. So overall, the general process is similar to that of a development variance permit, where an application is received by city staff, referrals are sent out to city departments, external agencies, and other groups for comment, and notice is given to nearby occupants and owners. A Board of Variance hearing is held where staff report. The Board of Variance hears statements from the applicant and members of the public before deliberating and typically resolving at the hearing itself, although notes that the board has up to 30 days to make their decision. I'd like to point you to the second attachment, so spreadsheet of the Board of Variance history. So this is the history of the Board of Variance that is currently active. So it begun in 2014. That's when the last Board of Variance was appointed by council. There's 2 things that I wanted to point out specifically in the spreadsheet. One being that the type of variances that are shown, mainly, again, like I mentioned before, they're mainly principal building setbacks or accessory building setbacks, floor area. This is the meat and potatoes of the Board of Variance and what they've resolved in the past 7-8 years. And then number 2, the increase of applications over time. So in the past 3 years, there's been a considerable uptick of Board of Variance applications, especially last year in 2020, there was 5 alone. Now this is partly it probably follows what the building permits trend was last year, where we saw a lot more building permits, and it's shown in the prices as well. So, and that's the overview I just wanted to give before we get into the summary and what this report council also is for. So the Board of Variance was last appointed, like I mentioned, in 2014. It consists of 3 members. A new Board of Variance member is required to be appointed. So Board Chair Ernie Toney and Board Member Ernest Gamache would like to remain on the Board of Variance. So the recommendation is that council authorizes staff issuing a request for persons to put their name forward for appointment to the board, and that council inform staff of members of the public who may be interested in being considered for appointment to the board.
So on the recommendation, Councillor Elliott, second Councillor Runge. Any questions or comments? Okay, so get some names, think about who could be on this and give staff some assistance there. Anyone opposed to the recommendation? Seeing none, that motion has passed unanimously. Thank you, Lyndon, for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Director Turner, now you're up for a negating report.
Thank you, sir. Yes, unfortunately, this report is to advise of the cancellation of the zoning amendment bylaw for Hoy Street. That was for the Anasco First Nation housing development project we were hoping for. Unfortunately, funding was not obtained by the band, and therefore they've decided that they will retract from this project. The recommendation, therefore, is that council rescinds first and second readings of official community plan amendment bylaw number 1903 and zoning amendment bylaw number 1904, and that council stands down official community plan amendment bylaw number 1903 and zoning bylaw amendment number 1904.
Councillor Elliott, so moved, seconded. Don't everybody rush. Councillor Rudenberg. Okay, any questions or comments? Councillor Paul.
Thank you. I'd just like to know if there's no specific section in this report dealing with financial implications. However, I'd like to know if the application fee covered the city's expenses with respect to this file.
Oh, thank you, Councillor Paul. Good question. The application fees maybe didn't in this particular case due to COVID. We did have to take some different actions with respect to notice and public hearing. The public hearing notice was issued, but the fees were not returned. As per our policy, we don't return fees after the notice has been issued and fees were not returned. So those fees should have covered the majority of the publication. The publication was a bit larger, so I think we didn't quite cover it, but we'll be making amendments in the future if COVID consists and we have to make large newspaper ads as we did.
Okay, any other questions or comments? So on the recommendation, anyone opposed? Seeing none, that motion's carried unanimously. Thank you, Director Turner. Moving on to the next item, Manager of Economic Development and Tourism on the Business Support Hotline update. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So the purpose of this report is to provide council with an update on the recent business support initiatives. And before I go into my report, I just want to say I think generally we have a really positive picture of what's going on relative to what we're hearing from around the province. But I do want to recognize that we do have some businesses that are really hurting, and they do exist, and there have been people that have been laid off in our community. Also, just a note that these calls wrapped up right before the circuit breaker closures. So I've got some notes on what we've done since then as well. So as more supports for business have continued to roll out and change, calls have continued to businesses in the community. For this round, we hired 2 contractors. So Charlene Lawrence, who's our event coordinator and not coordinating very many events at the moment, and then Linda Turner, who used to work in the visitor center, were both hired to make these calls so we could do it as efficiently as possible. We also made a number of referrals to Community Futures for more detailed support in completing applications to funding programs. So again, we prioritized the full business license list, calling 713 businesses. So it's just over 1,000 businesses on our list, but we didn't call multifamily dwellings or accountants' offices or businesses that are not actually located in Quesnel. Businesses with perceived greater impacts were called more than once, and if a connection was not made on the first try. We connected with 291 businesses that responded to questions and received assistance on this round of calls. Questions were asked in a logical manner with a triage approach, so not all businesses answered all questions. If businesses were eligible for the Province of British Columbia grant of up to $30,000, that's just where we directed them. We didn't continue asking them a bunch of questions about how many people they had hired or had to lay off, or whether they were interested in the Love Quesnel program. We just got them to that $30,000 grant. Many businesses who were doing well opted not to respond to questions, but were very appreciative of the call. So in total, that 291 businesses equates to about 41% of the businesses that we called. And I won't go through all of these stats, but I do just want to highlight that only 7% of our businesses reported that they were down and were worried about having to close their business. 31% said that business was down, but they were adjusting. 37% said business was down temporarily, but is now pretty much back to normal. And 23% said business is up. 2% said business was up and expanding. Another one that I'll highlight there was that only 23% of our businesses would be eligible for the BC Small and Medium Business Grant due to a drop in revenue. And there had been 26% had some increase in revenue in 2020 compared to 2019. And 27% reported being roughly the same. And then the remainder had a drop in revenue, but not enough to qualify for that grant. Altogether, we made 263 referrals. And I won't go into all of those details, but they're all listed there into what types of referrals we had. And just some additional challenges that businesses noted. Inventory and supply chain concerns, that's what's holding some businesses back at the moment. Attracting employees, especially during the surge period. The COVID-19 cleaning protocols, and I think what we heard earlier was, how that changed over time and just always having to adjust. Barriers to accessing the small business grant, though that did improve as we were doing these calls. And then just general COVID exhaustion. I think the whole community feels that, but the business community especially. So just a couple other things I wanted to highlight. Concurrent to doing these calls, Community Futures had offered to our BIAs and the Chamber of Commerce $5,000 for them to support their businesses in their areas. And the West Quesnel Business Association had suggested that they would take their $5,000 to sponsor Love Quesnel signups. And Community Futures really liked that idea, so they offered to instead have West Quesnel Business Association use their money for something else, and Community Futures sponsored the sign up. So we ended up with 35 more businesses in our Love Quesnel program, which then gives us $3,500 more to promote shopping local in the community, which is a really great win. And then since these calls were done before that circuit breaker grant, we've since then now we've collected all these email addresses of all of the restaurants. So we've made sure that we've reached out via email to all of the restaurants so that they know about the circuit breaker grant. They know that Community Futures is there to support them in applying for that grant. And then again, partnering with South Quesnel Business Association, West Quesnel, Downtown Association, and the Chamber, we've got going through our Love Quesnel page a bunch of giveaways supporting our restaurants and encouraging people to take out Tuesday, take out Thursday, dine out on patios, do as much as we can to support those restaurants during this time.
Thank you. Questions or comments? This is an information only for council. Okay, Councillor Rudenberg.
Almost. Thank you. So Amy, we know this program has been just absolutely amazing. Even from my perspective, we've talked about it at UBCM. It was talked about twice at the BC Economic Development set of meetings that just happened. And I'm actually going to be speaking about it again with BIA BC. We're talking about how the North is dealing with it. And so the title of our little piece is Wait, What You Can Do That. And it has to do with how businesses can work with government, can work with all, instead of working in silos. So this program has been truly amazing. When you think about the kind of money that's been brought into Quesnel, and as a community, we're being recognized for this. I know Amy hasn't talked a lot about that, but as a community, we've been recognized several times for this program. So kudos to you and the rest of the crew on the commitment to this program, because it's been over a year now that it's been in place. Good stuff.
Yeah, good. Thank you, Councillor Rudenberg. And two quick comments. I would ditto Councillor Rudenberg's commentary, and I think in our case, and they weren't submitted together for reasons, but in our case, the combination of the Love Quesnel Shop Local with the direct business supports and some of the hand-holding, I think, has been very powerful. I guess just a sidebar comment, it would be very interesting to somehow continue to track this kind of data year over year, because I would be very curious, given your percentages of, down at risk, down adjusting and so on, what would a normal year look like? Because there are businesses that in a normal year struggle, and to have only 7% down and risk of closure, I don't think that that's far off from what a normal year would likely be, in which case then I think the interventions that are going on, the support that's being given, the local marketing that's being done, I think is really trying, keeping us as much as possible in that normal domain. But the other piece is that supply chain. And when I talk to lots, particularly the retailers, they would be actually in the business is up category, a lot more of them, if they didn't have the supply chain problems that they've got, because the sales are there, but the inventory isn't. So, that's an interesting dynamic as well. So any other comments or questions from council on this information report? Okay, seeing none. Thank you, Manager Reid. Very much appreciated. Moving on to Director Turner again on the community garden. Director Turner.
Thank you, Mayor. This report is for the community garden for the Baker Creek Enhancement Society. They are looking for a new location for the former Quesnel Junior School site in North Quesnel. Baker Creek Enhancement Society has determined that they would take over this as a formal agency in order to relocate the garden. They are proposing using their property at 601 Johnson Avenue, but will require use of a portion of the city-owned land east of that property, as shown on the location map. Staff recommend entering into an occupancy agreement with the society for this use, which will define the boundaries and stipulate conditions of use. The recommendation is that council approves staff entering into an occupancy agreement with Baker Creek Enhancement Society for use of city lands west of 601 Johnson Avenue for the use of a community garden space, and that the mayor and or corporate administrator be authorized to execute such documentation as required to complete such agreement.
And this is a recommendation from PABCOM to proceed on this as per the report earlier. So I'm seeing Councillor Runge move the recommendation. Councillor Goulet, am I seeing you second it? Okay, questions or comments? Seeing none. Anyone opposed? Seeing none, that motion is carried unanimously. Thank you, Director Turner. Okay, and Director Norburn, some good news.
Very good news. Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. The purpose of this report is to obtain a resolution of support to enter into an agreement with Transport Canada to obtain grant funding under the Airports Capital Assistance Program, or ACAP, for the runway, taxiway, and apron rehabilitation at the Quesnel Regional Airport. So the city submitted an application for funding under the program for 100% funding to rehabilitate the runway, taxiway, and apron. We received confirmation from Transport Canada that the grant was successful a couple of weeks ago, and the grant will provide $7,162,526 for the rehabilitation of the runway, taxiway, and apron at the airport. Transport Canada requires a certified resolution to enter into the contribution agreement. So the recommendation is that Quesnel City Council approves entering into an Airports Capital Assistance Program contribution agreement with Her Majesty the Queen in right of Canada for up to $7,162,526 for the rehabilitation of the runway, taxiway, and apron at the Quesnel Regional Airport. And further, that Quesnel City Council agrees to assume all project costs above the level approved by the minister, being $7,162,526. And further, that council authorizes the Director of Corporate and Financial Services to sign the contribution agreement on behalf of the city.
Don't everybody all jump at once to move this one. I saw Councillor Elliott first and then Councillor Rudenberg second. They beat everybody else to the punch. Any questions or comments on this one? Councillor Paul?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. There seems to be a little bit of a contradiction here. The recommendation that says that the city council agrees to assume all project costs over and above the grant money. But then under financial implications, it says that there is no impact to the city budget, and the grant is expected to cover 100% of the cost of the project. My question is that would there be an upper limit on what the city would contribute over and above?
So Councillor Paul, again, this is a pro forma where Canada is saying, if you go over this amount, we ain't paying for it. That's all it is. So the intention is, as per our capital plan, to keep it at or, at this amount. But effectively, all that Canada wants us to say is we're not going to hold them accountable for any overages.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay. Anything further? So on the recommendation, anyone opposed? Seeing none, that motion's carried unanimously. Shocking, I must say, shocking. Next, then, the outdoor cafe business request. As council is aware, this was an electronic vote, so this is an opportunity for us to give the background to the public, but the vote has already been taken, so we will not be voting this item. Go ahead, Director Turner.
Thank you, Mayor. The purpose is to officially obtain permission to allow an outdoor cafe for Mr. Mike's, including an accessible stall. Mr. Mike's Steakhouse has requested the ability to construct an outdoor cafe in public space to allow for outdoor seating during the COVID-19 restrictions. It was determined through a review of the site that the best location for this cafe is to utilize the accessible space, including the sidewalk let down and one additional parking stall fronting the business. Staff continue to work with the business owner to ensure design and character of the proposed temporary outdoor patio is appropriate for Reed Street and the surrounding business community. In keeping with the commitment to expedite outdoor cafe permits for restaurants, an electronic vote was requested on Friday, April 16th. Results of that vote are attached, and I believe we got a unanimous vote on that recommendation. For process, do I read the recommendation into record, Mr. Mayor?
Yeah, please do. But and then, as you've already indicated, the vote's been held.
Yeah, should we have questions first then?
Mayor Simpson,
Go ahead.
how do I reflect in the minutes mover and seconder if we don't call it to a vote?
Yeah, and this is the problem with electronic votes, and I think we clarified this before, because otherwise the vote's redundant. The vote's already been held electronically, so I guess we can hold it again, but let's make a note of getting clarity on this in our procedure bylaw for when we have to hold these time-sensitive electronic votes. And for tonight, just because procedurally you're correct, Ms. Hartley, we need a mover and seconder to it. We will re-vote, I guess. So Councillor Runge, I'm seeing your hand up. Councillor Paul, are you putting your hand up for the motion, or have you got a question?
I'll put my hand up to second the motion, and I'd just like to make a comment that
you're the seconder and you've got the floor for comment.
Yeah, and as a member of the board of directors of New Pathways to Gold, we have a number of electronic votes, and the way that we handle it at board is that at the next meeting, we simply ratify the outcome of the electronic vote. So I don't know if that helps, but it gets it into the public record.
Yeah, and I think the key point here, and I appreciate that advice, but we do need to clean it up in our procedure bylaw, because I know we had this issue last time as well. What the CRD does is they just note it, as a public report like this, with the vote having been held, and report out on the vote. So I don't know how they get past that mover and seconder piece, but let's do it this way tonight, and then we'll get that clarified so that we don't have this issue in the future. So on the motion, are there any further questions or comments on either the report or the motion? Seeing none, anyone opposed? Seeing none, that motion has passed unanimously. Okay, thank you. No changes to, where are we at here? Oh, sorry, I again scrolled too fast. Council information package has been received. No items were asked but brought forward. I asked for the item to be brought forward for correspondence, a letter from the city of Penticton at UBCM. I thought council may want to send a letter of support and weigh in on this. As you may know, as of this morning, I believe, my days are kind of blending into each other, but as of this morning, I believe the city of Penticton has told their constituents about funding a lawsuit against the provincial government for bypassing their local planning authority and the establishment of a shelter. I think this is a mess. I think the provincial government is creating an even bigger mess, and I personally very much feel for the city of Penticton and the mayor and the situation they've been put in. So I would ask council by way of a resolution to support the autonomy of local government and our planning authority and send a letter to that effect supporting the city of Penticton to the Premier and Minister Eby. So I'm seeing Councillor Paul and Councillor Runge. Any further comments on this? Okay, go ahead, Councillor Runge and then Councillor Rudenberg.
Yes, thank you for bringing this up, because it's actually quite disturbing when I read this originally, because you know that bypassing is not what we want. So I'm really happy to see that we're in support of writing a letter against this.
Councillor Rudenberg.
Thank you. So these letters came out before UBCM even had a chance to respond, just so you know. That's as much as I can say right now. But I definitely think that in this letter, we need to make sure that it is specifically about the land use autonomy piece. We don't want people to be confused about the type of housing, etc. We want it specifically about the land use autonomy.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. With that in mind, anyone opposed to the motion? Seeing none, that motion has passed unanimously. Moving on to bylaws, the South Quesnel Business Improvement Association levy final adoption. Mover and seconder, please. Second, Councillor Goulet, so moved. Councillor Runge, did I see your hand? Second, questions or comments? Anyone opposed? Seeing none, that's passed unanimously. The Fire Protection Prevention and Emergency Services bylaw, first, second, and third readings. Councillor Elliott, so moved. Councillor Runge, second. Questions or comments? Seeing none, anyone opposed? Passed unanimously. Bylaw 1903, the official community plan amendment for Hoyce Street, rescinding first, second readings and standing down. Motion. Councillor Runge, Councillor Elliott. Anyone got comments? Anyone opposed? Seeing none, moved or passed unanimously. Then 1904 zone amendment, rescind first, second readings and stand down for the same property. Mover and seconder, please. Councillor Elliott, Councillor Rudenberg. Anyone opposed? Seeing none, passed unanimously. And then the outdoor cafe amendment, final adoption. Motion, Councillor Vic, Councillor Runge. Questions or comments? Anyone opposed? Seeing none, that has passed. No changes to the upcoming meeting schedule, no changes to committee appointments. Any announcements or future events? Seeing none, any gallery questions?
Yeah, I Cassidy from the Observer here. I'm hoping, I guess, this $7 million for the runway, is that just for rehabilitation, or are there going to be any new features added?
Director Norbert.
Sorry, I wasn't expecting that. The question is, will there be any new features? It's really just to rehabilitate what's there. So the runway needs to be repaved. It's obviously very large, so it's a fairly significant cost, but there's no real new additions to the airport.
Yeah, and it's the runway, taxiway, and apron. So it's a kind of an all-in repaving. Okay. Any other gallery questions? Seeing none, then a motion to, and I always get confused, a motion to adjourn this meeting, and then we will take a 5-minute recess and reconvene in a special closed. So Councillor Runge, Councillor Elliott. Anyone opposed? Okay, so council and appropriate staff, please stay on the line, but we will take a 5-minute recess. So we'll reconvene 8:10. Give everybody a chance to get a body break.